All right, Shabbat, good morning, a good tavach. It is a great schos, Baruch Hashem, to be able to begin another week of Masechah Sanhedrin together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pei Hey, the year 5785, the Tolson Mishpacha from Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the shiurim and drashos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves, the Kalman Mishpacha, in memory of Amit ben David Levi, Zichron Levracha, brother of Itai Levi, who was killed fighting in Gaza on the first night of Hanukkah. Our week of learning sponsors, Zevi and Shoshi Daniel, Le'ili Nishmas, Zevi's father, Yitzchak Yisrael, Ben Rafal Noach Yosef, and our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Alan and Sue Meyerowitz, in memory of Sue's mother, Mindel Funeral, Mindel Bas Shlomo Todros, Zichron Levracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Salam and Aliyah, all of the families Zein Nechama, all those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Kodesh Baruch Hu Shem Yirtzeh Hashem, bring our hostages home b'shalom and b'karov, and should allow our holy soldiers to be successful b'chol ma'asei yedehem. But with that, let us begin. We have a great, really incredible. I should have put it out yesterday on the chat. Exceptional daf today. Today's daf is Chav Vav 26, and we are picking up on Chav Vav 26. 5 lines down from the 6 lines down from the top at the 2 dots. No, sorry. Actually, 4 lines down from the top at the 2 dots. So let's remember again, we had a really incredible Mishnah, fascinating Mishnah, which is going to open the door to so many wonderful and incredible discussions about people who are unfit to serve in what we'll call a testimonial capacity. So amongst those individuals, the Mishnah had Lashon. The Mishnah had the Lashon. On Chav Daled Lebeis, the Mishnah had the Lashon of Sochrei Shvius. So, which again, at first glance, sounded like those who do business with Shemitah produce. Remember again, Shemitah, our sabbatical year, every 7 years, the halacha is everything in the field becomes hefker. So one of the things you're not allowed to do with Shemitah produce, you can eat Shemitah produce to your heart's content. That's not a problem. There are 2 issues that come up with Shemitah produce. Number 1 is doing business with Shemitah produce, and number 1 is storing Shemitah produce after it's no longer readily available in the field. Let me start with the second one first. You could go ahead and amass and store Shemitah produce. That's not a problem, as long as it is readily available in the fields. Once something is no longer readily available in the fields, you cannot store it in large quantities in your home. We'll discuss that more. The other issue is doing business with Shemitah produce, which is straight out. In other words, remember, during Shemitah, everything's hefker. So there's a great business model, right? All of the inventory is free, right? So let me go out, grab up all the inventory, and sell it. So again, you're not allowed to. It sounds like a great idea. Only one problem: it's aser. So like a lot of great ideas, right? So lemaisa, you're not allowed to do that. That's called sochrei shvius. So the Mishnah says that a person who does business with Shemitah produce is not allowed to serve in a testimonial capacity. It's pasol le'edus. Now the Mishnah then went on, and the Mishnah said, Rabbi Shimon betchila hayu korin osa os ve'shvius mishirabu ha'anasin chazor likrosan sochrei shvius. So then Rabbi Shimon comes along with this interesting statement. He says in the beginning, they would call people gatherers of Shemitah produce, and then when the anasim, now an anas is someone who compels someone to do something. When the anasim, right, with the proliferation of anasim, they began to call them people who did business with Shemitah produce. So again, not exactly clear in the Mishnah what is happening, so let's go on in the Gemara. So let's go. Says the Gemara. My Kamar. What exactly is it that Rabbi Shimon is saying in the Mishnah itself? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Hachei Kamar. That's what it means to say. B'tchila hayu omrim osvei shvius ksherin sokrim psulin. So in the beginning, in the first iteration of the halacha, there was a very straightforward halacha. What was the straightforward halacha? People who gathered Shemitah produce are fit to give testimony, fit to be an aid. Right? Why? Because there's nothing wrong with gathering Shemitah produce. That's fine. In other words, that's what you're allowed to do during the Shemitah year, is gather produce. Sochrin psulin. But if you did business with Shemitah produce, then you're puzzled. Right? So if you gathered from the field, it's free, and then you went and you sold it on a secondary market, that is asr. Because remember, now I will say, any time that one is publicly or flagrantly violating an aveira, that essentially renders you unfit to give eidos, right? It's not necessarily just a din in doing something illegal with Shemitah produce. This is any avera that a person does flagrantly Without remorse. Okay, what happened? Misharabu mamtsie mos laniyim v'asli aniyim v'asi lahu umaisi. So then what happened? So there were these people, and apparently this became a common practice. That what would happen? A guy with some money would hire a group of aniyim, hire a group of poor people, and he would say to the poor people, "Go and gather as much shemitah produce as you can." Because remember, again, there is no limitation on the amount of shemitah produce that one is allowed to take from the field. You can take as much as you want. So there were people, they would hire poor people to go ahead and gather shemitah produce, bring it back to them, and then what would happen? Then they would sell it. They would sell it. So chazru lomar echad zev v'echad zev psulin. So what ended up happening? What ended up happening is they went ahead and they said that halacha l'maisa, everybody's puzzle. Everybody's puzzle. So now, interestingly enough, what this did is that halacha l'maisa, this said whether you were an osvei shvius or whether you were someone who was sochrei shvius. Ultimately, again, it was going to be puzzle. So the Gemara says, "Kashu b'nei Rachba." I don't understand. So the sons of Rachba were troubled by this. They didn't quite understand. They said, "Hi, misharabu ha'anosim, misharabu ha'tagarin mibayle." But one second, at the end of the day, the Gemara says, then why does it say misharabu ha'anosim? Anosim makes it sound like there are people who are extorting, right? So it should say misharabu ha'tagarin. When the merchants, in other words, when people got involved and started making a business out of this, that's when Chazal had to step in and say anyone essentially dealing in mass shemitah produce is going to be prohibited from giving edus. So the Gemara says, Ella, listen to this. Betchila hayu omrim, echad zev v'echad zev psulin. So in the beginning they said, both of these individuals are puzzle. In other words, whether you go ahead and you are a merchant or you are a gatherer, you are puzzle. Misharabu ha'anosim umayninhu, who are the anosim? Arnona. So this is very interesting about say. So if you look at Rashi says Arnona, mas is the second of the short lines of Rashi. Mas shegova hamelach min hatvua kach v'kach kurin min hasad l'shana. Arnona, the taxes. Modern Hebrew Arnona is also taxes. Hey, so but this was a tax of the king that the king levied upon the field. If you paid the tax, great. If you didn't pay the tax, he was going to go ahead and take your field. Now, this posed a unique problem during the Shemitah year. Why? Because during Shemitah year, you're not farming. So now, but yet, you still have to pay your taxes even though you were not farming. So the Gemara says, so what happened? Misharabu ha'anosim arnona. As Rabbi Yanai said, poke v'zaru b'shviyas mishum arnona. So this is incredible. Rabbi Yanai said to the farmers, he said, get ready for this. Go and plant your fields during the Shemitah year because of arnona. Now I will say, this is incredible. Look at Rashi. Poke v'zaru b'shviyas. Shviyas bizman hazeh drabanon. Debatla kiddush ha'aretz. So listen to this, I will say. So Rabbi Yanai was concerned about the following idea. The Jewish farmers were obligated to go ahead and give their tax, their crop tax. Shemitah, not Shemitah, didn't make a difference. The king didn't care about Shemitah. So like we said, this posed a unique problem because that would mean if during Shemitah they couldn't pay their tax, what would happen? The king would come and seize their field. Get ready for this. Rabbi Yanai put out a public declaration. He said, Chevra, I want everyone to go ahead and plant and seed and harvest their field during the Shemitah year. How can you do such a thing like this? How can one do this? So remember again, Rashi points out, Shemitah during the days of Rabbi Yanai was Drabanon. So because Shemitah is Drabanon, one has a little bit more leverage. Now, again, remember, what makes Shemitah Drabanon? Shemitah is only D'oraisa when there's Yovel. Yovel's only D'oraisa when Rov Yoshveh Aleha, the majority of Klal Yisrael lives in Eretz Yisrael. We'll say, by the way, this is actually contemporarily important. That's why, again, even now, we have certain mechanisms. For example, Shemitah, like the big debate. I think there's a Shemitah year coming up, right? Is it 2 years? We just had it. We just had it 6 years ago. I know. It's every 7th year. I got it. I'm aware of that. Right? I'm pretty sure within the next couple of years is Shemitah year. Yeah, and so the next 7 years is Shemitah year. So it's interesting. So one of the raging debates about Shemitah is Heter Mechira. right? The notion of going ahead, essentially like mechiras chametz, like selling land to a non-Jew, says, it's complicated and fraught with issues. The only reason such a concept like that even gets off the ground is because halacha l'maisa shmita bisman hazez d'rabanan, according to most opinions. So because it's d'rabanan, you have a little bit of leverage. Again, I will say something very exciting that we are going to see very, very, very soon is the scales are going to tip. There's going to come a point in time in the not so distant future where the majority of Klal Yisrael is living in Eretz Yisrael. That is going to have a dramatic effect, not just on the fact that, to think about that the first time since the days of the second Beis HaMikdash, the majority of Klal Yisrael will be living in Eretz Yisrael, but understand it also has a number of different halachic ramifications as well. In any event, Rabbi Yana comes along and says, Chevra, I need you to plant your fields, because if you don't, we're going to lose our land. Chazru Lomar, so they went in and they said, Osvin Ksherin, Sochrin Psulin. Those who gather Shemitah produce are kosher le'edus, right? You're not doing anything wrong. Sochrin, those who conduct business with Shemitah produce, they're pasal le'edus. So the halacha l'maisa, the takeaway from this is people who collect produce for Shemitah, that's fine, no problem, kosher le'edus, because that's a perfectly permitted practice. The issue is with those who do business with Shemitah produce, that's problematic. Those individuals ultimately, again, are going to be pasal le'edus. Okay, now I will say the Gemara tells a story, dramatic story. Get ready for this. Rabbi Chia bar Zarniki, Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok, Havi ka'azli la'aber shana ba'asya. Okay, get ready for this story. So Rabbi Chia bar Zarniki and Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok. Right, so we'll just call Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon. We're going to intercalate the new year. They were going to declare a leap year, la'aber shana, in a place called Asya. It's called Asya, a city called Asya. So what happened? Pagu b'hu Reish Lakish. So they bumped into Reish Lakish on the way. Reish Lakish says, "Hey guys, where are you going?" Right? And they tell him, we're going to declare a leap year. He says, "All right, Eitbal b'hadayu. Could I come with? So okay, so now we've got Reish Lakish, Rabbi Chia. Can you just imagine, like, being in the back seat of that minivan, right? Can you imagine being in the third row over there and just listening to what's probably going on with that chevra, that whole heilige chevra? So Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Shimon, and now Reish Lakish tags along. So the Gemara says, Amar, Ezel Echzi Hechi Avde Uvda. Reish Lakish said, listen, I don't need to participate, but I would like to see how the intercalation, how a leap year is done. You want to come along? Okay, so Reish Lakish comes along. So as they're traveling, Chazi Lahu Gavra Tika Karif. They saw a guy plowing his field. Now, both say it was a Shemitah year. They saw a guy plowing his field. So Amar Lahon, Kohen v'choresh. This guy who's plowing, he's a Kohen, and he's violating Shemitah. This Kohen is violating Shemitah. Amrulo, so interesting, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon were surprised at how Reish Lakish was so judgmental about this individual. They said, one second, Amrulo, Yochel Lomar, Agiston Ani Besocho. First of all, who says it's a Jewish-owned field? That's number one. Number two, maybe that Jew works for the non-Jew. If you look at Rashi, Agiston Schir, the Karka Shel Nachrihu, Inay Mishom Arnona Schara Balabayis Lachrosh. So number one, maybe it is the field of a non-Jew. That's number one. And maybe this Jew is a hired hand. Okay. Number two, maybe it is the field of a Jew, right? And remember, what did Rabbi Yana just said before? Rabbi Yana just said before that Allah Chalamaisa, under extenuating circumstances, like when the king is going to seize your field, if you don't pay the tax, you're allowed to work your field. So essentially, they say back to Reish Lakish, whoa. Now, understand, Reish Lakish was saying two things. Number one, he called the guy a Kohen. You Kohen, right? That's number one. And he said that's a Kohen who is in violation of Shemitah. So he's saying two things about the guy. Okay, part one of the story. Next, Su Chazielu Gavra, Dahave Kazakh Bakarmi. They saw a guy who was pruning his vineyard. Again, it's a Shemitah year. You're not allowed to prune your vineyard on a Shemitah year. So the Gemara says, Amar Lahan, Kohen v'Zamar. The guy is a Jew, he's a Kohen, and he's in violation of Shemitah. Amar Le, Yachol Omer La'akil Beis Habad Ani Tzarech. they said, whoa. First of all, pruning in general is only prohibited if done in a particular way. This guy may be gathering branches in order to make a netting for the olive press, right? When you have an olive press and you have a pile, Rashi points out, you have a pile of olives, they would put like a type of netting on top of the olives to keep the pile together. That netting was often made from smaller, softer branches. So it could be the guy's not pruning the vineyard, but instead what he's doing is he's gathering some stuff from the vines in order to go ahead and make the netting for the olives, which would be permitted. So again, it's this fascinating tension here between, on one hand, Reish Lakish going ahead and saying these guys are Kohanim in violation of Shemitah, and these other Rabbanim trying to go ahead and be Malamed Zechus. So Reish Lakish responds, he says, Amar lahem, Halev Yodea im la'akel, im la'akal kolos. The heart knows. Ultimately, again, if it's making netting, right, or if it's perverting the halacha. That was a little bit of a play on words, right? Because again, the lashon for making the netting for the olive press is la'akel beis habat, to make the netting, and akal kolos represents like a corruption of din, a corruption of justice, a corruption of importance. Rashi says la'aver al hadas. So we'll say, so this is incredible. So Reish Lakish says these people know what they're doing, and they also know that what they're doing is wrong. So Reish Lakish was confident in his assessment of the situation. We'll say that line, by the way, is such a profound idea. You can fool everyone. You really can. You can fool everyone. The one person you can never fool is yourself. And even if I manage to delude myself for some amount of time, that moment of self-awareness always sets in. You could run from it, you could delay it, but it always comes at some point. Halev Yodea. At the end of the day, you could fool everyone else in your life, and you could do a great job at it. You could do it for decades, you could do it an entire lifetime. But at the end of the day, Halev Yodea. Your heart knows what's right and what's wrong. And my heart knows whether or not I'm living the life I need to live, I'm becoming the person I need to become, I'm engaging in the activities that are really appropriate for me. My heart knows whether or not the image I project to the rest of the world is the true me or is a facade. An overwhelming and incredible, we'll say, it's reminiscence. Rabbi Soloveitchik points out, that I mentioned this many times in one of his first essays on tshuva. Rav points out that tshuva, so we often translate tshuva as repentance, right? But the truth is, that's not really what tshuva means. What's the true etymological definition of tshuva? Is to return, right? And in fact, Rabbi Soloveitchik points out this comes really from Shmuel. Shmuel Hanavi. Shmuel was unique in that he wasn't just a Navi, he was also the shofet, he was also the judge. What was even more unique about it was he was literally a circuit judge. In other words, what he would do is he would travel the land throughout the year, bringing the beis din, bringing the dayan to the people. The lashon that the Navi uses is uteshuvaso harama, when he would come back to his home in Ramah, teshuva so. So Soloveitchik points out, he says, you see from here that at the end of the day, tshuva really means a return, and not just a return, but a return home. And Soloveitchik says something so beautiful. He says, life is one big circle. He says, the only variable is how big the radius is. That's it. How big is the radius? He says everyone has that point where they come home. And what Rabbi Soloveitchik is really referring to is not just the return to Hashem, but that moment of overwhelming self-awareness. You could run from it for a very long time, but at some point in time, that self-awareness is going to set in. All of the excuses I make, right, and all of the shitos and all of the hashkafas and all of the philosophies, which all sound fantastic, but at a certain point in time, they all come crumbling down. And I have to face the reality of what I am and what I'm not. That's what Reish Lakish was saying also. Halev Yodea. You can fool everyone else, but the heart knows. The heart knows im la'akel, im la'akal kalos. So the Gemara says, hey, Amr Bereisha. By the way, the Gemara just asks, out of these two stories, which one actually occurred first? Was it the plowing guy or the pruning guy? If you want to say that ultimately, again, it's as it's stated, see, the problem with saying that they occurred, as just mentioned, is why not bring up, right? Remember when they saw the guy plowing, which like I said, he's a Kohen violating Shemitah, and the other two Rabbanim, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon said maybe he's a hired worker. If the second story, if the first story occurred really first, then why not use that same excuse for both cases? That's a good excuse, or not a good excuse. It's a good interpretation, a good explanation for both cases. Rather, it must be that the pruning case came up first, and after realizing that that was not a good excuse, then they brought up the worker excuse afterwards. Okay, Mashna Kohen. So Gemara says, 1 second. Why are Kohanim getting such a bad rap for being willing to violate Shemitah? What's going on over here? So we'll say this is very interesting. Mishum de Chashidi Ashvius. It was known that Kohanim were suspect to violate Shemitah. They were suspect to violate Shemitah. Now why? This is fascinating. Listen to this. If you have one saw is a measurement, one saw of truma. Now remember, truma can only be consumed by a kohen. One saw of truma that falls into a saw of Shemitah produce. Now, what's interesting about this? So remember again, truma only can be consumed by a kohen. Shemitah produce can be consumed by anyone and everyone. So now I have a sa'ah of truma that falls into a sa'ah of shemitah produce. Yeah, I'm going to get to. Yeah. So right, one sa'ah of truma that falls into Shemitah produce. Now, the Shemitah produce over here is chulin, right? Even though Shemitah produce is Shemitah, ultimately, again, it is chulin. Again, chulin with limitations. Now, we'll say, remember, if you have just one saw of truma fall into one saw of chulin, so the entire mixture becomes truma. That's the halakha. In this case over here, one saw of truma falls into 100 saw of shemitah produce. So we'll say, what's the halakha? Tala. So remember, the ratio for bittul of truma is 100 to 1. So if you have 100 parts chulin to 1 part truma, the truma is batal. Now, by tala, pachos mikan yirkavu. If it's less than a ratio of 100 to 1, then what? You have to let it rot. Now, why do you have to let it? Now, we'll say, now, why do you have to let it rot? Now, let's go through this. If it's less than 100 to 1, then what's the status of the mixture? Truma. So why do I have to let it rot? There's a remedy. What's the remedy? Give it to a kohen, sell it to a kohen. So yet the Brisa says, let it. The Mishnah says, let it rot. Vavinaba, amay yirkavu. Why do you have to let it rot? Yim karena lekohen b'dimei truma chutz b'dimei ososa. Sell it to a kohen. I will say now, in general, this is interesting. There was a market, right? So if I'm a Yisrael, I am a Yisrael. Right? So if I'm a Yisrael, so now what happens? I have truma. I'm supposed to give my truma to the kohen. I mismanage. I'm a notorious truma mismanager. So what happens? My truma gets mixed in with my chulin. What do I have to do now? Let's go through this. It's important halachas to know. What do I do now? If it's less than 100, if it's more than 100 to 1, 100 parts chulin to 1 part truma, then good, I'm good. Less than 100 parts, what do I do? So what's the status of the mixture? What's the status of the mixture? Chavra, too many blank expressions looking right back at me. Either avoid eye contact or say something, right? All right, so I'll say, so now, you know who you are, right? So again, less than 100 parts, less than 100 parts, one part truma to less than 100 parts chulin. What happens? What's the status of the mixture? Truma. Excellent, here we go, good. So I'll say, so now what do you do with that mixture? What do you do with it? Now here's what's interesting. Now you could if you're a nice guy, you could gift it, but you don't have to gift it. You don't have to gift it. Why don't I have to gift it? Because at the end of the day, there's chul in there. So remember, there is a market on which you could sell this. What's the market? The coin market. Now remember, the coin market, everything is going to be at a discount. Why? Because the Kohanim have the upper hand, right? Because they know it's a limited population that could buy this. Therefore, they have the upper hand. So now the Gemara says like this. So watch this. I have one saw of truma that fell into, we'll call it 90 saw of shemitah produce. So the truma is not bottle. So what did the Mishnah say? You got to let it rot. The Mishnah says, why do I have to let it rot? I should be able to sell it to a kohen. Now, just be careful. Now, what could I sell to a kohen? I could sell to the kohen the amount of the mixture minus the truma, because I can't charge the kohen for truma, right? Why not? Because it's his. So I could sell him the amount in the mixture minus the truma. So let's say there's 90 sa'ah of chulin, of shemitah produce. One saw of truma, so the total volume is 91 saw. I could charge him obviously a discounted amount for the 90 saw of chulin. That sounds like a much better option than going ahead and letting it rot. What's going on over here? To which Rabbi Shmuel Silber. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, we don't want you selling Shemitah produce to Kohanim. Why? Because Kohanim are chashud, they are suspect of not following the rules when it comes to Shemitah produce. How could it be that Kohanim get such a bad rap over here? So we'll say, take a look at Rashi. This is fascinating. Nechshadu Kohanim, Rashi says, Lahashos Shvius Achar Zman Bir Demoru Be'atera. So we'll say, so now what's the issue? The issue is like this. As we mentioned before, you are only allowed to store Shemitah produce in your home as long as what? It's readily available in the field. Once it's no longer available in the field, you have to go ahead and you can't store it in your house. Kohanim were notorious for storing Shemitah produce in their homes even after it was no longer available in the field. Now why? Kohanim are so good, they're so pure, they're so sweet, right? So why are they so chashad over here? So look at Rashi, this is fascinating. Rashi says, they have the Mora Heter, they have a good excuse. Good excuse. What do they say? Because Kohanim say like this, come on. We always keep Kaddish stuff in our homes, right? We have Truma, right? We have Kadshim, we have all these different things. Okay, so the rest of so remember, Shemitah produce is Kaddish, Truma is Kaddish, there are other Kohanic gifts that are Kaddish, so Kohanim were Mora Heter, they made an excuse for themselves, and they said, you know what, regular people have to go ahead and divest themselves of Shemitah produce, but we Kohanim, we do not. We are allowed to keep holy stuff in their home, so we'll say, so because of this, they got a reputation of being derelict in proper treatment of Shemitah produce. So because that Chazal, this is incredible, Chazal made enactment, Kohanim are choshud on Shemitah produce. So therefore, again, and I will say, therefore, incredible, so that results in this last case, that during the Shemitah year, you have Truma that gets mixed in with Shemitah produce. If it's 100 to 1, or if it's 100 to 1 ratio, fine, the Truma's bottle, you're good to go. But if it's less than 100 to 1, you can't even sell to a Kohen. Rather, you have to let it rot, and then once it rots, you're permitted to dispose of it. Incredible. All right, back to the story. So the Gemara says, so now remember we've got Reish Lakish traveling together with Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon in order to see how they intercalate the month. So Amru, Chruda Hudain. So Rabbi says, listen to this. So these Rabbanim, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Chia, said about Reish Lakish, this guy is a troublemaker. He's real trouble. Like, in other words, that like, why are you walking around? And they were taken aback by his negative disposition. I will say now, I just want to point out something very interesting. Reish Lakish, who's Reish Lakish? Who's Reish Lakish? Reish Lakish has been around the block. Right? Remember again, Reish Lakish is the ultimate Baal Tshuva, right? Reish Lakish was a thief, a gladiator, all these different kinds of, he had a very, very checkered past, right? And then he went ahead and becomes a Baal Tshuva and embraces the totality of Torah. Reish Lakish probably had a little bit more of an insight into human nature than these other Rabbanim, simply because Bepashus, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Chia grew up ben Kosle Beis HaMedrash. They grew up in the Beis Medrash. Reish Lakish says, I'm telling you, I know people. I've seen people. And one thing I could absolutely detect is when someone's dishonest. Sometimes, what is it? It takes a thief to know a thief. Sometimes when you've lived that life of dishonesty, you could schmeck it. You could smell it a little bit different. Like you could detect it a little bit more. So now again, I will say I want to point out. Interestingly enough, we're going to see the Gemara doesn't. Well, let's go weiter. Okay, so what happens was this. So now these other Rabbanim are very taken aback. But Reish Lakish is unapologetic. And so say, also you have to understand, what seems to be strange about this Gemara is, Reish Lakish, that there's a din. What's the din? You have to be down the kaf schus. You have to give people the benefit of the doubt. So these other Rabbanim seeming, right? So, if you're Reish Lakish, he would probably say, you have to be done l'kaf schus, not done l'kaf shtus. At the end of the day, I will say, yes, you have to give people the benefit of the doubt, but there are times when what is happening is so clearly and abysmally wrong that, no, it's wrong. It's wrong. You can't make up a favorable narrative for every single thing. Now, again, For us, the halacha is bidan l'kaf v'suchos. But perhaps for someone like Reish Lakish, who was much more plugged into human nature, he was able to see what was right, what was wrong. All right, let's go weiter. So we'll say the story gets better. We're not finished yet. Right? Kimatul Hasam. So now what happens? They arrive at the place in what they called Asya, this place where they were going to do the Ibrayar. They were going to declare the new month, the new year. They were going to declare a leap year. So what happens? Moses is great. So Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says, Salikul Igra. So they went upstairs to the attic. That's where the Rabbanim were going to convene. Shalufa ledarga mitusei, and they took out the ladder right in front of Reish Lakish, which means he said, "You're not coming with. You are not coming with. Right? You're here. You came with." Shkayach, you tagged along. We'll tell you a little bit about what's going on afterwards, but you are not coming up to the attic with us. Okay, Asla Kamed Rabbi Yochanan. So it says this. Reish Lakish was now offended. He was very upset. He comes to Rabbi Yochanan. Remember again, who's Rabbi Yochanan? Who's Rabbi Yochanan? Right? Right? Rabbi Yochanan is Mishpacha. Come before Rabbi Yochanan. Amar lei. So we'll say, get ready for this. Reish Lakish says, Amar lei, B'nei Adam ha'chashudin ala shviyis sherin la'aber shana. Cool. So we'll say, listen to this. So now Reish Lakish says, I don't understand. Are these people who are suspect about non-observance of Shemitah, are they permitted to go ahead and Bima Abed? Are they permitted to declare a leap year? They both say. Now, remember again. Now, what does that mean? Reish Lakish is accusing Rabbi Shimon. Is accusing Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon of violating Shemitah. What he's saying was like this: is also say part of the obligation of leadership is to point out when someone's doing something wrong. So Reish Lakish says these Rabbanim walked by these fields of these Kohanim who are violating Shemitah. They didn't say anything. So if you don't stand up in the face of wrongdoing, you are complicit. You are complicit. This is what I was supposed to say. I just want to point out we are seeing these things unfold in such a dramatic way. When you look at Rahman al-Islam, what is happening in Australia now with the anti-Semitic events. And people are foolish. It's wonderful that the government is going to make a counter-terrorism this. When a government doesn't stand up against terrorists and a government doesn't stand on the side of good, namely the state of Israel, if you don't make a clear stand against evil, then by definition you are siding with it. It's not an accident that after Australia made all of their ridiculous political stances and political moves, that there's an outpouring of anti-Semitism. That's what happens. That's what happens in the world. If you don't make a clear stand against evil, then by definition, you are with it. You are with it. So Reish Lakish says, Rabbanim, you're either for Shemitah or you're against Shemitah, right? So pick a team. And if you see guys violating Shemitah, and at the end of the day, you don't make a macha, you're not going ahead and making an objection, then by definition, you are violators of Shemitah. So Rabbi Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, how could these guys who violated Shemitah be part of the chevra that's declaring the new year, or leap year, sorry. So just then Reish Lakish was thinking, it says like, you know what, it's actually not such a big problem. I'll tell you why. So we spoke about this before, because the truth is they're no worse than the three shepherds that the rabbis relied on their on their information in order to go ahead and declare the new month. Meaning, in other words, maybe, so Reish Lakish said, maybe these two Rabbanim, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon are not really part of the Beis Din to make the leap year, but rather they're just sharing information. When it comes to sharing information, you could even be a shepherd. All right, pretty stark. So we'll say, so again, just understand what happened over here. Reish Lakish just called these two Rabbanim, essentially called them shepherds, right? Roy Bakar, and also called them people who violate Shemitah. V'hadra Amar lo dami hasam hadur imnu Rabbanon va'avrua lahu shasa hacha Kesher Risha'imhu. The Kesher Risha'im Einam Minamiyan. Then Reish Lakish said, no, that's not a good raya, because the truth is in the previous case, the rabbis relied on the shepherd information, but the shepherds were not part of the actual Beis Din. Here, my concern is that these two Rabbanim, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon, are part of the Beis Din, and if these guys are part of the Beis Din, then this is what's called a Kesher Risha'im. Kesher Rishayim. Sounds like a good name for like a shul, right? You know, okay? Congregation Kesher Rishayim, right? Right? Yeah, whatever. And it's like, Kesher Rishayim, right? So they said the problem over here is that these two Rabbanim, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon, so ultimately again they're part of the Beis Din, and if guys like this are part of the Beis Din, then a Beis Din like that becomes what's called a Kesher Rishayim, a congregation of Rishayim. So we'll say Reish Lakish is sharp. Reish Lakish is very sharp in his analysis over here. So look at Rashi for just a moment. Kesher Rishayim veheich anu somchin al minyan zeh lasos kidivreihem va'afilu ihen osin al ibor kidin ukidas as hashanim misaber sa'idein teboina beis din nimnin v'zeh eno minyan. Okay, so therefore Reish Lakish is really saying, I don't understand how this beis din that's operating up in the attic that I wasn't allowed into, right? I don't understand how this is a valid beis din. So Rabbi Yochanan da akka. So Rabbi Yochanan says, you know what, I think it's a little bit over the top that you're calling them Rishayim. In other words, so Rabbi Yochanan, so look at Rashi, Da'aka, Shata Kori Osan Rishayim. I think it's a little bit over the top. In other words, it's interesting. Rabbi Yochanan says, you want to hold them accountable for not objecting to Shemitah violation? I hear that. I do. In other words, if you notice, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't counter that point. But to call people Rishayim, that is already a different level, and that level of what's the word? Incrimination. Yeah, that level of diatribe, that's already a little bit over the top. So Rabbi Yochanan says that I don't think we could do. So Kiyasala Kamid Rabbi Yochanan. So I'll say, so now what happened? The Rabbanim came down afterwards, right? And again, somehow they heard about what Reish Lakish said about them. So Kiyasala Kamid Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Le Karilan Roy Bakar Velo Amar Marvelo Midi. So listen to this. So what's interesting is they said to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon come down and they say to Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish called us cattle herders. He called us shepherds. And you didn't say anything? Like you didn't stick up for Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan's all in the middle of this, right? You didn't stick up for us? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Amar lehu, v'kari lechu roi tzon, maya minalei. And if he would have, so what are you upset about that? He called you cattle herders? If he would have called you sheep herders, would you have rather, would have made a difference? In other words, so it's very profound. Rabbi Yochanan is saying is, so what? So what? So what? Right? What's one of the first lessons that we teach our children? Just because someone calls you a name doesn't mean you need to react. Yeah, Reish Lakish was upset because Reish Lakish thought you were wrong, so he called you a Rishayim. He called you. And if you notice, by the way, Rabbi Yochanan counters Reish Lakish. He called him a Rasha. That I'm going to step in. That I'm going to step in. Right? But Lamaisa. Once you go ahead, he called you a cattle herder. Okay, get over it. Now I will say, interestingly enough, that's where the story ends. So I must say, there's so much to take out of this story. So if you notice, by the way, right, we're not sure from the story itself, like who was right. Was Reish Lakish right? Were these other Rabbanim right? Were these Kohanim were in violation of Shemitah? Not. So again, the Gemara doesn't really give us that clarity. But there are tremendous lessons to be pulled out. What you see from Reish Lakish is the need to go ahead and stand up against things when they are wrong, because if you don't, then by definition you're siding with evil. On the other hand, you see from Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Chia, bidam lekaf schus. Right? So again, and different times in life require different things. What you also see is that Lamaisa, just because someone says something to you, doesn't mean that you need to respond. This is probably one of the lessons that has been lost, especially in the social media age, right? Where it is just so easy to deliver an immediate response. And I will say, you don't have to respond. Just because someone says something, you don't have to respond. And how often in life do we respond to something then afterwards like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, right? And if you go ahead and then, right, you WhatsApp something and then you delete it to this, that, people are really fast. They're really fast and they often see what you did even before you deleted it. And why? Had I just had enough self-restraint just to not respond, life would be so much better. But we also see that even in vehement discussions or debates, there always has to be a limit as to the type of words you're ready to use. No matter how justified you may be in your position, you have to be careful with the words that you use. And I will say, you see this, without wading into it, we know that for our people right now, one of the most contentious issues is the issues of the draft in Eretz Yisrael, the draft of the Haredi community. Tremendous issue. We spent Shavuos night on it. So without even wading into it, I'll say, but the moment that someone uses the word Nazi, right, in the context of a debate between Jews, you've lost. Even if you're right, you lost. You lost because once you are not careful with your words like that, you have lost the debate because you've lost credibility in the agenda that you're trying to put forward because clearly you have no ability to measure what it is that you're doing. And when you have no ability to measure what you say, it probably means you lack the ability to see things in a holistic fashion also. It is so incredibly important. Even if I'm right, being right doesn't allow me to open up the verbal arsenal and say whatever I want. Words always have to be measured. Incredible. All right, let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. Okay. All right, so the Gemara says like this. Where are we up to? Good. My Kesher Sham. So what's I say? Now, interestingly enough, so one of the things that Reish Lakish said was he called it a Kesher Sham, right? The fact that Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shimon were going ahead and part of this meeting, he called it a Kesher Sham. So the Gemara says, what is? We've never heard that expression before. What is that? What does that mean? An assembly, right? An assembly of evildoers. A Kesher Sham. What's that? Kesher means like a bond, like a Chevra of Rishon. What does that mean? But get ready for this story. This is wild. This is wild. My Kesher Hashem, Shevna Hava, Darish Betleis Rabusa. So now we're going to be introduced to a story of Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda with one of his most trusted advisors, Shevna. If these names or this story don't sound familiar to you at all, it's okay. It's from an esoteric book of Jewish knowledge called Navi, right? And again, if you have a sister, right, or a female member of your family who has received a complete Jewish education, you can ask her about these stories, about these legends, right? So I will say, so listen to this. So now this is incredible story of Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. So listen to this. So Chizkiyahu, right, the guy who ran essentially like his chief of staff. His chief of staff was a man by the name of Shevna. Shevna was a tremendous Talmid Chacham and had an immense following. Havadarish betleis rabusa. When he would darshan, in other words, the number of he had 130,000 followers. Meaning, when he would give a shir, 130,000 people showed up. Okay, listen to this. Chizkiyahu havadarish bechad sari rabusa. Interesting. Chizkiyahu, who was the king of Yehuda, right, the son of David HaMelech, he had 110,000 followers. 110,000 Chassidim. Again, not too shabby, but less than Shevna. Ki asa Sanhedrin v'tzar alei Yerushalayim. So now we know the famous story. Sanhedrin comes and lays siege to Yerushalayim. Now, just to understand, this is the famous story of Sanhedrin's siege of Yerushalayim. Now, listen, understand, there was no real way militarily for Am Yisrael to win this war. Right? They were outmanned. Sanhedrin came with a huge army. He had conquered a number of the cities. This is Yerushalayim. He had already conquered part of Eretz Yisrael as well as other countries around. There was no real way to win this war. So what happened? Kasav Shevna Piska Shada Begira. Shevna said, "Okay, we need to negotiate. We need to negotiate an organized surrender. Maybe if we do this, we can have some type of autonomy." So what did Shevna do? The problem was Chizkiyahu didn't want to surrender. So what did Shevna do? He wrote a note, essentially a letter to Sanhedrin saying, "I am Shevna, representing 130,000 people here in Yerushalayim, or 130,000 households. We are ready to negotiate a truce." And he put it on an arrow. He shot it out. And what does it say? The letter said, Shevna v'siyaitu ishlimu, Chizkiyahu v'siyaitu lo ishlimu. Shenemar ki hine harisham yidruchun keshes, konenu chitzam al yasar. So we'll say, so now what happened? So Shevna literally wrote a letter to Sanhedrin saying, Chizkiyahu doesn't want peace with you, but we, meaning me, Shevna and my followers want peace with you. And he sent this letter to Sanhedrin. So Chizkiyahu was concerned. He didn't know what to do. So Chizkiyahu said like this, there's a concept of Acharei Rabim Lahatos. We follow the majority. So Chizkiyahu started second guessing himself. And he said to himself, you know what? Maybe Shevna's right. Shevna is the majority. He is the majority. He's the rov. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu often goes by the majority as well. So maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want me to stand up to Sanhedrin, but rather he wants me to surrender as well. What happened? The Navi came to Chizkiyahu and he said to him, Lo somun kesher l'chol asher yomer ha'amazeh kesher. So listen to this. We'll say, so here he quotes over here the pasuk from Yeshayahu. Lo somun kesher l'chol asher yomer ha'amazeh kesher. So the Navi comes and says like this: Kolomar kesher rishayim hu v'kesher risham enam min haminyan. This is not a regular rov. This rov is what we call a kesher risham. So here's where the expression comes from, right? This rov is a kesher risham. This is a congregation, an assembly of the wicked, and an assembly of the wicked is not called a halachic majority. Incredible. Halach lach. So we'll say. So therefore, the Navi tells Chizkiyahu, do not surrender. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has your back, do not surrender. Well, Shevna is feeling pretty good about himself, right? Because Shevna feels that now, first of all, he commands the majority. He sent this letter to Sanhedrin and is very confident that now he's going to be installed as the new king. So what does Shevna do? So the Gemara says, Shevna comes along and does. Halach lachtzov lo kever b'kivrei beis David. Shevna decided to go ahead and make for himself a grave in the burial place of Davidic kings. So Shevna is really getting ready, right? He's getting ready to go ahead and assume the throne. He's going to be installed by Sanhedrin. So he decides he also wants to choose his burial plot where he's going to be buried in the Davidic chelik. So the Navi says to Shevna, "Who are you? Who are you? What are you doing? Who are you? What are you doing here that you're carving out yourself a grave in the Davidic plot?" Amarav. So essentially, the Navi said to Shevna, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to make you a wandering man. The Gemara says, interestingly enough, Amarav tiltula de gavra kashimi de esesa. The wandering of a man is more difficult than the wandering of a woman. What does this mean? That in general, people have more rachmanas on a poor woman than they have on a poor man. So the Navi was saying, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to make you like a wandering man, namely that you're going to be a wanderer, no one's going to have rachmanas on you. So we'll say what happens. Va'itach ata Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina melamed sheparcha bot saras. So Shevna gets leprosy. Ksiv hacha ve'atach ato ksiv hasam ve'asafam yata sanof yitz fenecha safna kadra el eretz rachvas yadayim tana hu bikesh kalon beis adonov. Shevna wanted to bring disgrace upon his master's home, Chizkiyahu's home. Napach kvodo l'kalon. Even though Shevna was all great, right? But Shevna ultimately, again, his glory turned into degradation. We'll say, get ready for this. So now, Shevna and his followers, right? So Chizkiyahu says, I'm not surrendering. Shevna, along with his followers, say, we're surrendering. We're surrendering. So they get ready to leave Yerushalayim, Shevna and his whole chevra. What happens? So Shevna is at the front of all of his followers, ready to exit Yerushalayim to surrender to Sanhedrin. As they're walking out of the gates of Yerushalayim, Asa Gavriel, Ach de Ladasha Ba'ape Misharsiye. So what happened? Right as they're walking out of Yerushalayim, so Shevna walks out, and the moment that Shevna walked out, Gavriel, the Malach Gavriel, closed the doors of Yerushalayim on his followers. So he kept the followers in the city, and ultimately, again, Shevna walked out by himself. Amud Beis, Amrulei. So now Shevna comes before Sanhedrin, and remember again, what did Shevna's letter say? Shevna's letter said that I represent 130,000 people in Yerushalayim. So now he comes by himself. So Amrulei, Mishar Siei Checha. So Sanhedrin says, Shevna, where are all your followers? Amru Hadrubi. So Shevna says, well, now Shevna didn't realize about what happened with Gavriel. What he figured was that at the end of the day, his followers just decided not to come. Right? Hadrubi, they stay in Yerushalayim. Amru says, Imkain, Achuchi Kamachayis. So obviously you're making fun of me. So Sanhedrin thought this whole thing was a joke, right? Here. So Shevna claims that he represented 130,000 people, and meanwhile, what happened? He comes out by himself. Sanhedrin says, "You're embarrassing me." You can imagine again? There probably was a whole delegation ready to accept the surrender of 130,000 Jews. And probably it was just 130,000. It's probably much more because it's 130,000 people we darshan to. But Pashas, they had families also. So it was supposed to be a delegation of a lot of Jews coming out. And meanwhile, one guy comes out. Sanhedrin says, "You're making fun of me. You're mocking me." What did he do? So the Gemara says, "Nakvu ba'akava v'talu b'zan v'suseim v'yumegarin also ala kotzim v'alabarnagim." So they bore a hole in the soles of Shevna's feet, attached him to the tail of their horses, and dragged him on the thorns. So Shevna, unfortunately, again, literally eich naflu giborim. What a descent that he experienced. I will say, get ready for this. In general, it's always fascinating to see when great people experience such a terrible fall, right? What are the mechanics of that? Obviously, Shevna was the second in command. Shevna was the second in command to Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. Chizkiyahu was so great that he could. We learned about Chizkiyahu last week's daf, actually a week ago, right? Where again Chizkiyahu was responsible for such a heightened level of scholarship within Klal Yisrael. It was like a golden age of Jewry. Everyone knew the halachos of Tum and Tara, right? It was last Monday's daf. Everyone knew the halachos of Tum and Tara, right? It was a golden age. Things were good. Chizkiyahu could have been the Mashiach. Things were going well. Shevna has everything: power, influence. So how do you make such a dramatic mistake? How does that happen? Let's say, get ready for this. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Shevna bal hana haya. Shevna was steeped in physical pleasure. Ksiv hacha, lech bala sochein hazeh, uksiv hacha vatihi lo sochenes. Where makes exer shav of sochein sochenes? Actually, sochein means the treasurer, and sochenes was by Avishaga Shunamis and David HaMelech. So I will say, so interestingly enough, what was Shevna's downfall? Shevna was a pleasure seeker. That was his life. His life was the seeking of pleasure. When a person, what does that mean? What does that mean? So I will say, when a person lives life, and the most important thing to them in life is their personal pleasure, right? It doesn't even have to be necessarily anything illicit, although Rashi points out it might have been illicit also. But even if it's not illicit, when my whole life just becomes about pleasure, and everything is about pleasure, everything is about enjoyment, everything is about comfort. So I'll say, what kind of life is that? What kind of life is that? You're like, yeah, sounds pretty good. Right. What kind of life is that? That is an egocentric life. Let's say life is not about pleasure. Life is about service. Life is about service. We are put here on this earth to serve, to work, to do. We are part of Klal Yisrael to contribute to our nation. Life is not about being selfish. Life is about being selfless. That's the avoda of life, not pleasure, but service. The issue is when life comes about pleasure, which I will say, it is so easy. By the way, not even just about like excess, not even about anything illicit, but just like when my life becomes about what I want. This is what I want, what I need, what makes me comfortable. When life becomes about those things, then that's an egocentric life. And an egocentric life, I will say, leads one to gaiva. And once one falls into the clutches of gaiva, of arrogance, of self-centeredness, everything falls apart. Everything falls apart. The story of Shevna, I will say, is the story of great people throughout the ages who are so much potential, so much greatness, but they take a wrong turn because everything becomes about themselves, as opposed to it becomes a life of pleasure, as opposed to a life of service. And when you take that wrong turn, it's only a matter of time until the downfall. So what happened over here? To be honest, what happened over here? So Shevna, who was living a life of pleasure, ultimately again becomes arrogant. And what happens with Sanhedrin if he sees, this is my moment. This is my moment to become king. And the moment that gaiva sets in, I will say, you lose all clarity, all perspective. It's interesting, right? You would think to yourself, here there's a siege on Yerushalayim. And yet what is Shevna doing? What is he doing? He's marking out his kever, right? He's deciding where he's going to be buried. Right? He's already making the plans. Forget about my life turning king. I'm already making my plans for my death as a monarch. And once that happens, all reality is lost. And when all reality is lost, unfortunately, again, the missteps begin, which ultimately lead to his demise. What an overwhelming story. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Ki hashasos yaresun tzadik mapal. So we'll say, so now the Gemara quotes over here the pasuk. From Malachim. From Tehillim. Ki hashasos yaresun tzadik mapal. So again, just to understand how the Gemara is darshaning this pasuk. Ki hashasos yaresun. For the shasos, we'll define what shasos means, will be destroyed. Tzadik mapal. what has the tzaddik accomplished? Now we're going to see different ways to read this pasuk. So Rav Yehuda Rav Ino, Chad Amar Ilu Chizkiya v'Siyaito Nerasim Tzaddik Mapal. So something refers to Chizkiyahu. If Chizkiyahu and his assembly, his followers were destroyed, what good would that be for the tzaddik? V'chad amar ilu beis hamikdash yaras tzaddik mapal. Others say if the beis hamikdash was destroyed, this is if Hashem would have sided with Shevna over Chizkiyahu, what good would have happened? V'ula amar ilu machshavos shel osa rasha einon harasos tzaddik mapal. If the plans of that Rasha, i.e. Shevna, were not upended, what good would the tzaddik have done? So So according to the opinion that says that Shasos refers ultimately again to the plans of Shevna, it makes sense. Kodesh Baruch Hu destroys the plans of evil people. This not Evan Haisa Shami Mos Nevi'im Rishonim Ushesiya Haisa Nikres. It makes sense to call the Beis Hamikdash also Shasos. Why? Because it was saying the center of the Beis Hamikdash, actually by the Kodesh HaKadoshim, was what's called the Evan Shesiya, the foundation stone. That was the first piece of matter from which the world was created. Where do we ever find the tzaddik? That a tzaddik is called a shasos. The chsev is beautiful. Kila Hashem mitzuki aretz vayesht alein tevel v'bais emo mehacha hipila eitza higdil toshia. Rabbi Chanan, fine. Lama nikra shma toshia. So I will say, you see from something very interesting. Torah is something called Toshia. Why is Torah called Toshia? This is beautiful. Mipnei shimateshes kocho shel adam. Because it weakens the koach of a person. Now I will say, listen to this. Look, what does that mean? Toshia, Toshia, shel al shem sha'olam mateshes al shem sha'olam mishusach ala Torah v'lom den nikras Toshia. Sorry. Good, fine. So before we get to that, so we'll say first explanation. Why is Torah called Toshia? So the Pashup Pshat over here is that Torah weakens a person. Now let's say, this is very interesting. What does it mean Torah weakens a person? David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Torah Hashem Temima Meshivas Nefesh, Torah revives the soul. So which one is it? Does Torah weaken? Does Torah revive? And we'll say, what's the answer? The answer is yes. Right? Torah revives the soul. But I was saying, to take on the yoke of spirituality is hard. It is hard. It revives. My soul is awakened. But the truth is, the responsibility is overwhelming. It really is. And the truth is, sometimes that spiritual responsibility could absolutely deplete the kochos of a person. And I will say, but it's not a bad thing. Anything in life that requires exertion, by definition, saps you of your energy, right? A person makes a simcha. Right? A person marries off their child. A person makes a bar mitzvah. And what happens? You're dancing, or bas mitzvah, just bris, maybe bris a little less, because you're not dancing as much, right? You dance for hours and hours and hours. You come home, and how do you feel? Exhausted. So you say, Nebuch, you're exhausted. Not Nebuch. This is like the best exhaustion in the world, because I gave every bit of energy that I had to that simcha. Exhaustion isn't a bad thing. Exhaustion is a beautiful thing as long as I'm exhausted for the right reasons. Torah, spirituality could exhaust you, because if you're fully immersed in it and you're giving it your all, it saps you of your energy. And that's not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing. How do you know? If you're fully immersed in Torah? If Torah makes you tired, that's a good sign. Or a bad Magid Shir, one of the two, right? If Torah makes you tired, then ultimately, again, that is a sign of complete immersion. On the other hand, if Torah doesn't sap you of any of your energy, chances are you're probably just auditing it and not really fully immersed. The Shem Yishmael, the Sakhachav Rebbe actually brings down also, he says on this phrase, Mivneshi Mateshes Kocho Shadim, this is beautiful, is Kocho Shadim, he says, is a reference to the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara. Do you know what the power of Torah is? Torah weakens the Yetzer Hara, which I both say is such a beautiful idea. We know it from Maseches Brachos, right? The Gemara says, Liolam yargiz adam yetzer tova yitzhara. A person should try to go ahead and always incite their good inclination over the yitzhara. What happens if a person can't overcome their yitzhara? What does the Gemara say? Mashcheu lebeis hamedrash. Bring yourself, draw it, pull it to the beis medrash. Torah allows us to weaken our yitzhara. We know this. So let's say when you're learning the daf, usually. Most of us don't have a dramatic Yetzer Hara to go out and commit Averas when we're doing the daf. Now, maybe the moment I close my Gemara, there's something else going on, right? But so I would say, why is that? Why is that? Because when you're steeped in Torah, by definition, it pours beautiful, translucent, holy waters on the fire of the Yetzer Hara. That is the power of Torah. It's mateshes kocho shel adam. It diminishes the power of the Yetzer Hara, which is why, by the way, the Gemara says, the person is struggling with the Yetzer Hara, sometimes all they need to do is just open a sefer really quickly. Or, now Baruch Hashem, you can pull up it on a nap, right? Pull up Sefaria, right? And just read a pasuk. It's like the fire hydrant of spirituality. There's a fire that's raging, just open the hydrant for a couple of moments. And it's amazing what could occur. The Gemara goes right, the Gemara says, another possibility is, why is Torah called Toshia? The Gemara says, Shenitna b'chashai mipnei asatan. All right, well, so you know what? We'll have to stop over here. I don't know how I didn't get through this on a Sunday. All right, okay, fine. All right, more for tomorrow. Let's say Shkoyach. Again, we always wind up in the right place. Let's say it's a much shorter daf tomorrow. Very. Don't look. Shkoyach. Let's say wonderful start to the week. Incredible. All right, Chevron on Zoom. Have a wonderful day. Morning, Daniel. How are you? Yeah.